Hello, this is Jack Wedby. We're in the middle of Black History Month, and I wanted to give you just a little background on how I became interested in Black history. And in the year 2000, we moved to Atlanta, and I was one of the pastors at Atlanta Family Church. The neighborhood there was mostly Black, and our church congregation was about 60 or 70% Black, depending on what particular Sunday or if there was a holiday or not. And it was a mixture of African Americans, Caribbeans, and Africans from Africa. And so I started becoming interested in Black history at that time. And on Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, I visited the Martin Luther King Center for Social Change in downtown Atlanta. And I bought one of his books. And during Black History Month, if I was giving a sermon on that particular day, I would use quotes from Dr. King in some of my sermons. Now, I have to tell you, giving sermons to a live audience is much easier than speaking to a camera. With the live audience, I could walk off the stage, I could make it interactive, I could talk to the people, I could ask questions, and they'd give answers back. So this is a little new, so bear with me. In 2001, we visited Memphis, Tennessee for a big campaign and revival with our church, and we did a lot of interfaith work with different Black ministers and religious leaders from all religions, but actually most of the respondents, most of the participants were Black ministers. And so we visited the hotel where Dr. King was shot and killed in 1968. And at that time, I continued just each January and February. Well, for me, somehow Black History Month started with Martin Luther King's birthday because I always had to either prepare a sermon or at least talk about it. So I got into the habit of each year, I would read a new book about Black history. Also, around that time, our two oldest kids were attending a magnet school in South DeKalb County. They were in elementary school at the time, and this was an amazing school, exceptional. The kids wore uniforms, they said yes sir and no sir. It was a very, very high quality school and very advanced curriculum, and it was an all-Black school. I think there were only maybe 2 or 3 other non-Blacks in the school, and I missed that school. It was amazing. So it was in a neighborhood in that part of DeKalb County filled with these, what I call success churches, filled with a lot of middle-class professional Blacks that worked for Delta or Coca-Cola, and it was a phenomenal experience. So therefore, I just continued my interest in Black history. And every January and February, I'd read a new book. So in this video, what I want to do is share a lot of these books with you and just give a few comments from some of the books. In addition to that, my older sister, Amy Tankersley, is a tour guide in downtown historic Charleston, South Carolina. And she's a big history buff. And she would, once she knew that I was interested in Black history, then she would go to used bookstores and just kept sending me books. So now I have quite a collection, and I don't have time to discuss all of them today, but this in no way is a thorough overview of Black history. Just wanted to share with you some of the books that I've read and have found to be of great value. So this one right here, the words of Martin Luther King Jr., selected by Coretta Scott King. And these are just excerpts of some of his speeches. And I wanted to read, "We must work passionately and indefatigably to bridge the gulf between our scientific progress and our moral progress. One of the greatest problems of mankind is that we suffer from a poverty of the spirit, which stands in glaring contrast to our scientific and technological abundance. The richer we have become materially, the poorer we have become morally and spiritually. Every man lives in two realms, the internal and the external. The internal is that realm of spiritual ends expressed in art, literature, morals, and religion. The external is that complex of devices, techniques, mechanisms, and instrumentalities by means of which we live. Our problem today is that we have allowed the internal to become lost in the external. We have allowed the means by which we live to outdistance the ends for which we live. So, highly recommend it. The words of Martin Luther King Jr. This one also I bought, I think, at the Martin Luther King Center for Social Change. It's called A Knock at Midnight. And these are a series of his sermons. And the people that write an introduction to his sermons are also like Bishop T.D. Jakes, even Reverend Billy Graham gives introduction to one of his sermons, Archbishop Desmond Tutu. So I wanted to read another little section. So the hour has come. Oh, this is taken from his sermon called Remaining Awake Through a Great Revolution. Remaining Awake Through a Great Revolution. The hour has come for everybody, for all institutions of the public sector and the private sector, to work to get rid of racism. And now, if we are to do it, we must honestly admit certain things and get rid of certain myths that have constantly been disseminated all over our nation. One is the myth of time. It is the notion that only time can solve the problem of racial injustice. And there are those who often sincerely say to the Negro and his allies in the white community, "Why don't you slow up? Stop pushing things so fast. Only time can solve the problem. And if you will just be nice and patient and continue to pray, in 100 or 200 years, the problem will work itself out." There is an answer to that myth. It is that time is neutral. It can be used either constructively or destructively. Interesting thoughts about time. Traditionally we'll just say, time somehow will magically work things out. It's not true. Time is not just a magic thing. Time is neutral. What we do with it is our choice. So there's those two books. I am going to skip all the way ahead to the book that I just finished reading tonight. Before I tell you about this book, well, it's a bit of sociology and cultural anthropology, and honestly, it takes a bit of patience to get through it. Some of you might be able to relate to this. Like, someone will ask you, well, do you enjoy reading? Yes, I enjoy reading. But there's another part of me, and some of you can probably relate, where you'll get a book that is a piece of work. It is thick, it is dense, it's filled with statistics, and the bibliography for this book, or the notes, is this thick. So here's the actual book, the text, and from here back is all the notes, all the authors. So it's an academic book, and so even if it's heavy, and even if it's a difficult book to get through, because of my time in the university and in my time in the seminary, I have this habit of, well, I'm just going to make it through this book and push through and read it and digest it like it's a piece of work. So not everyone reads for the same reason. Some people read for pleasure, some people read for entertainment, some people read just to have their mind tickled a little bit, and some of us read because we consider it to be part of our work. It's like getting down to work. So here is the book, White Trash: The 400-Year Untold History of Class in America by Nancy Eisenberg. And so even though we're in the middle of Black history, This year has been very different. I thought, oh, should I read a whole book about Black history, or can I take the easy way out and go and watch a few 5-minute YouTube videos about Black history? Well, I did that. And Morgan Freeman and a couple other guys mentioned that, why do we have a Black History Month? They said, three of them in particular said, why do we have a Black History Month? Black history it's part of American history. It goes all year long. And on top of that, they put it in the shortest month of the year. 29 days, sometimes 28 days. And so I've looked at a few of those videos and been reading a few articles about Black history, but I slogged my way through this book. I don't like this term, white trash. When I hear other people use the term, it kind of like, I cringe when I hear it, because no human being is actually trash. It's just not true, but it's a word, it's a term that people use, and so I recognize that term exists, and the book deals with it from there. So very, very interesting about class and race in America. So I approached Black history from a totally different angle this year. Then, last year, rather than go to Barnes & Noble and buy another book or wait for my older sister to send me another book, I just went to the library, the public library just down the road, over here on Post Road. And I was looking, and I pray. Sometimes I ask for guidance from the Spirit. What should I read this year? And I almost got one by W.E.B. Du Bois. And I was looking through it, and it was another, the guy was a scientist. He was a sociologist. It's a very thick academic intellectual book, and he's giving statistics about shipments and economic shipments of goods and commodities here and there, and agriculture and economics. And I thought, maybe later. I asked the Spirit, send me a book that's going to hit me in my spirit, that's going to really shake up my emotions a bit. So what I found was a totally different one, and this is it. Can you see that okay? Who's Afraid of Post-Blackness? It's a pretty provocative title. What it means to be black now. And the author, I think he's a journalist. I don't know his full name. Touré, that's what he goes by. Some of you will already know who he is. You can look it up on Google. And that book it's very modern, whereas a lot of the other books are older books from the beginning, from Civil War era up till today, but this one is modern, and he's talking about the definition of being black and how they've all been discussing it back and forth, and those who are half black and half white or mixed race or whatever. So that was a pretty provocative book, and it's a library book. The topic came up, the Super Bowl. Congratulations to the Kansas City Chiefs. The quarterback, Patrick Mahomes. Yeah. So Facebook, they show something on Facebook just the other day and said he's the third black quarterback to win the Super Bowl. And then you can imagine the ridiculous comments. And one of my friends, he's actually a friend, he says, well, why do we need to recognize his race? At what point are we going to stop counting at the 50th black quarterback? And I responded to him, I said, look, first of all, I thought it was a good game between the Chiefs and the 49ers, period. I love football. And he's a great quarterback. He did a good job. So let the guy celebrate. The second point is, who cares whether he's half black or half white? But it does happen to be Black History Month. February is Black History Month. So he might, some of us might be celebrating in our own way. How do you celebrate? Well, I've been recognizing Black history. I didn't actually celebrate it, but I've been giving recognition to Black history for the last 20 years. I can't believe it. Here we are in 2020. And back in 2000, when we first moved to Atlanta, that's when my interest in it started getting steam. So back to Patrick Mahomes, he's probably just happy that he won the Super Bowl. Is he sitting around thinking, I'm the third Black quarterback to win the Super Bowl? By the way, Doug Williams, Washington Redskins. What year was that? Must have been like around 1988 or 89, perhaps, when Doug Williams and the Washington Redskins beat the Denver Broncos. So he was the first Black quarterback. I don't know who the second was. I forgot. Russell Wilson, maybe? So there we are. There we are. Black history. Let me move forward now. You got to read this one. You must. Up from Slavery by Booker T. Washington. Really amazing, all the work that he did. And I would read some quotations from it, but it would make the video too long. But highly recommend it. Then, Frederick Douglass, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave, written by himself. I like that. There's an introduction by William Mackey Jr. For some reason, I have 2 copies of this. I think my older sister sent one to me and didn't know that I have it. So, highly recommend it. It's a short read. And if sometime, even if you don't read it in the month of February, it'll be okay. You can read it in March. Black history could be any month, actually. This one, I think I picked this up at a secondhand bookstore in Roswell. The title is incredible. All God's Dangers, The Life of Nate Shaw. Now look how thick it is. But it's in a guy, a journalist or a writer interviewed him. It took a long time, recorded it, and then transcribed it and put together a book. So the text follows his speech patterns. And he had a rough life, but Nate Shaw, a real man, real man that existed, he, just his thinking, he never went to school, he wasn't educated, but his thinking about things is so deep and so profound. And again, if you're going to be a student of something, if you're going to study something, you don't, like I said earlier, you don't just read it for enjoyment or just to be entertained. You take it seriously. Like, this was a real dude that actually lived. And so give him a chance, Don't just start the book and say, oh, this isn't my style. Push yourself. Get on with it. This guy deserves a little bit of attention, a little bit of respect. So I can say at the end, I actually enjoyed it. But that's just me and my metaphysical concepts of enjoyment. Okay. After reading Dr. King, I believe after reading Dr. King, I had to switch gears. So had to deal with Malcolm X, the autobiography of Malcolm X, as told to Alex Haley, by the way. What a serious... His life was crazy. He was kind of worked on the dark side for a while before he converted and found God and became a Muslim. And it's too bad he was killed. I'm thinking, man, this is one guy that could have done some pretty amazing things. Very creative. What a life course. So highly recommend it. The Autobiography of Malcolm X. Okay. As long as we're dealing with autobiographies, the Autobiography of MissJane Pittman. Can you see it okay? Yeah? Mm-hmm. By Ernest J. Gaines. And again, just incredible. Her story starts from near the end of the Civil War, and how she sees the Union Army coming down the road towards the plantation where she lived, and how she met one of the Union officers, and he told her, look, you come up north, you can be free, and how eventually she did make it up there. Let me go ahead and read something from this. This is interesting, the way she thinks of men and rivers. There's an old oak tree up the quarters where Aunt Lou Bolin and them used to stay. That tree has been here, I'm sure, since this place been here. And it has seen much. So this old oak tree has seen very much. And it knows much, much. And I'm not ashamed to say I've talked to it. And I'm not crazy either. She spoke to the oak tree. It's not necessary craziness when you talk to trees and rivers, but a different thing when you talk to ditches and bayous. A ditch ain't nothing, and a bayou ain't too much either, but rivers and trees less, of course. It's a China ball tree. Anybody caught talking to a China ball tree or a thorn tree got to be crazy. But when you talk to an oak tree that's been there all these years and knows more than you'll ever know, it's not craziness. It's just the nobility you respect. Whoa. So she respects the nobility of an oak tree. I thought that was beautiful. Now she's talking about, I don't know when the first levee was built. She's talking about the levees down in this low country where there's swamps and stuff. Probably in slavery time. But from what I heard from the old people, the water destroyed the levee soon as it was put there. The flood came and destroyed the levee. Now, if the white men had taken heed to what the river was trying to say to him then, it would have saved a lot of pain later. But instead of him listening, no, he built another levee. The river tore that one down just like the first one. Built another one, and the river tore that one down. Here the river been running for hundreds and hundreds of years, taking little earth, maybe a few trees, maybe a cabin here and there when the water got too high, maybe a cow, a horse, but never a whole parish. Till the white man came here and tried to conquer it. They say he was French, and that's why up to this day, I don't have too much faith in any Frenchman. Now, what possessed him to come from way across the sea to come here and mess with our rivers? They tell me he said, this here water got to be confined. But he said it in French. He was a Frenchman. We can't let the rivers run wild like this, taking our trees like that. And she goes on. She's an amazing character, MissJane Pittman. Okay, there's that one. Oh, actually, well, Roots, Alex Haley, they made a television miniseries about it, and I thought this was an amazing, at least, well, the sad news is that just about 2 or 3 nights ago, when I was reading, actually I think in the book about white trash, they said they exposed, and it was his historical information wasn't all true, and he got criticized and some kind of fraud, but I don't care. It was written back in the 1970s, and it had a big impact, and we watched it on television, and everyone was talking about it. 1976, I think, or maybe 1977 when it was on television. It was, they did it in 4 or 5 nights, and you can probably see it today, even on YouTube or somewhere. But, wow, amazing story. You could just call it historical fiction. Why not? Okay. had a big influence. This is a different one. This is Black history, but this is a walkabout. James Vance Marshall. This is in Australia. An Aborigine and this little white boy and white girl, I think they get separated from their parents and they're out in the desert. And this young black Aborigine makes friends with them and shows them how to survive, and the kids end up surviving. So this they made into a motion picture as well. But it gets you interested in the deep spirituality of the Aborigines and how close they were to nature and how they communed with nature, and they understood everything, how to survive out in pretty rough country in the desert. So that is that. Okay, getting closer to home. This is Pat Conroy. He's the author. The River is Wide. And this is a story about his own experience. He was a school teacher on the Outer Banks, on the islands just off the coast of South Carolina, where the black people that lived out there, how do you say that language? Starts with a G. They speak a different dialect. It is English, but it's a different dialect. And very, very poor, very kind of isolated. And the setting is in, I think, the 1960s. And he is struggling. He has to take a boat to get to the island to teach. And he struggles with the white bureaucracy, the Board of Education, trying to give some actual benefits to that school out on the island. So Pat Conroy, The River is Wide. Highly recommend it. The story moves along real well. Okay, what else do we have here? Okay. I live in Forsyth County, Georgia, all right? In Cumming. Cumming without an S at the end. Cumming, all right? And Ku Klux Klan used to be pretty strong here. They had a strong foundation here back in the day. It's changed a lot since then. But in Forsyth County, way back in 1912, a young white girl was raped and killed. And they accused one black man, and anyway, long story short, they ended up running all the blacks out of the whole county. Blacks who had lived there for years actually owned their farms and their land and their house. They owned them. This wasn't too long ago. This is just a little over 100 years ago. And they just ran them all out and forced them to either sell their property for very little money, pennies on the dollar, or just leave. And some of them ended up getting killed because they resisted. So this book was actually co-written by my neighbor across the street. So him and his brother, Kel Bull, he's a doctor, medical doctor, and Ronald Sewell. I believe Ronald did the historical research, and his brother Kel actually wrote the story. But this is based on a true story that happened right here in Cumming. And it brings up the question about reparations. I think that's what they call it, reparations. The people owned their land. It was only about 100 years ago, not that long. Should you find their descendants and pay them back? You can talk about that if you want. But serious story, tragic, heartbreaking. It happened, but need to know about it. On that topic, I have to tell you a little story. Like I said, we moved to Atlanta, and I was one of the pastors in Atlanta Family Church down there, and we used to do a lot of seminars. And my parents had some property right up here in Forsyth County, pretty beautiful country property. And had a cottage built on there. In addition to their own house, there was a cottage. And occasionally we would do small seminars with small groups up there. And at that time, I was still living down in DeKalb County. This is before we moved up here. I was living in DeKalb County. We were driving the van up Highway 400 north, going north up to my parents' property to have a workshop. And in the van together with me was one young African-American lady. She was a nurse. She worked, in the medical field. So she was a nurse. And we're driving and she says, "Reverend Wedby, where did you say that your parents' property is again?" And I said, "Oh, it's just up here in Forsyth County." And her eyes turned square, like she said, what? But that Forsyth County? And I said, "Oh, relax. It's different now. You'll be protected. You'll be on my This was probably the year, maybe 2001 or 2002, something like that. Like we had not been in Atlanta that long, but even then it was already changing. But she was scared. She was scared to come up here. Wasn't sure if she'd make it out alive, but she did, and everything was fine. We drove past a few houses that had Confederate flags on it, and I said, "Don't worry about them. They're just, average people." So yes. Oh, stop the camera. Okay, we're back. This is another good one by Sidney Poitier. I think that's how you say it. The Measure of a Man, a spiritual autobiography. Now you remember he was an actor, and good actor. I just highly recommend it. Highly recommend it. I wish I had time to read some of the quotations, but you got to get it. Then this is kind of a classic. I think we read this in middle school or high school. Black Boy by Richard Wright. And this is kind of a heavy one. Let's see what the subtitle says. Oh, the restored text established by the Library of America. So Richard Wright, Black Boy. And, a classic in the field. Okay, so like I mentioned, my older sister is a tour guide in downtown Charleston and gives these walking tours, and she's like a walking encyclopedia of history. And British history, American history, knows a lot about the slave trade that happened right there in downtown Charleston. And so at the marketplace, right down there in the historic district of Charleston, I bought these books. And in the, I think it was the Depression in the 1930s, where the federal government started something called these federal works programs, and they put a lot of writers to work, and they had them go out and interview people in the Appalachian Mountains. They interviewed what the hillbillies, or what some people call white trash, and made some stories. And in particular, they interviewed people who had been slaves. So if you can imagine, if the Civil War was in the 1860s, and here we are in the 1920s, 1930s, then some of these people were children during the Civil War and were still alive in the 1930s. So it wasn't that long ago. So what they did, they interviewed them, and they gave first-hand accounts of what it was like to be a slave. And so they are published by, this one, We Lived in a Little Cabin in the Yard, edited by Belinda Hurmence. Okay. Here's one, Harriet Jacobs, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, unabridged. So this one is published by Dover Publications, or Dover Thrift Editions. And this one, let me see. Sorry about that. Where's the title? Oh, okay. We Lived in a Little Cabin in the Yard. And this one is published by John E. Blair, publisher, Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Okay. Then, this one is also a Dover, I'm pretty sure. Oh, John, my folks don't want me to talk about slavery. And this is 21 oral histories of former North Carolina slaves, edited by Belinda Hurmence. So she's gotten some of these little histories. They're only 3 pages long, little narratives that are just 2 or 3, 4 pages long. That's why they could fit 21 stories in just this little book. Some of them are really sparse. Some of them are revealing. This one is not exactly, I don't know, Black history or not, but I keep it on the shelf together with the other books. But it's by Denzel Washington, A Hand to Guide Me. And I just think Denzel Washington is one of the best actors, and I really like him a lot. But he edited this book, and he takes stories of all kinds of people, black and white, and how certain people influenced them, like they were a father figure or a mother figure or mentors. And the subtitle is Legends and Leaders Celebrate the People Who Shaped Their Lives. So these are well-known people that Denzel Washington got their story from, and they give credit to those teachers and coaches and mentors and parents or aunts or uncles who taught them and helped them grow up. So, good job. I think it's a good piece of work here. I think that's it. So, thank you very much for listening. This is our first video of coming and going communications, and we'll make more videos. I want to make some videos about vegetable gardening, about ultimate frisbee, about bike riding. I want to make another video about cell phone use, and especially about attention, what they call it attention deficit disorder. So I looked it up, if there's such thing as attention surplus order. And there are a few people on the internet that have made kind of sarcastic jokes about it, but I take it seriously. So I'm making a new organization. It's called Attention Surplus Holy Order. I'll tell you more about it later. Thank you for paying attention. Enjoy Black History Month. If it's difficult to read some of the books, push through and read them anyway. You'll be better for it. Thank you.